how the environment sectors in Malaysia will be responding to these challenges over the next few months. We have on the show tonight Wong, Siew and Lau Yao Hua. Welcome to the show, guys. Both of them are founders. Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, the environmental sectors in Malaysia have been impacted not just by the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, but also from the new government that has yet to make clear its environmental strategy. Now, in the face of this double challenge, our guests tonight from Macaranga, which is a portal covering issues of the environment and sustainability in Malaysia. And they will be taking stock of how the environment sectors in Malaysia will be responding to these challenges over the next few months. We have on the show tonight Wong, Siew and Lau Yao Hua. Welcome to the show, guys. Both of them are founders and co-founders and editors of Macaranga. It's good to have you on the show. Now, I want to begin the show with a quick look at, say, we start on a positive note. What are some of the positive impact that this COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown has had on the environment? Siew, would you like to start?
Well, I think that the positives have really made the news. We've been reading from all around the world how clear, for example, the waters of the canals in Venice are, swans appearing and all the rest of it. In Malaysia, that's also been the case. And I think Yao Hua has actually done a little bit of research on that.
So yeah, I guess it's hard to imagine, any positive effects from COVID-19. But if you think about it, I think at one point, up to 30% of the world's population was under some sort of restricted mobility control due to social distancing from COVID-19. So that meant immediately, traffic was greatly reduced. Lots of economic activity was reduced, and there were reports, anecdotal and even research reports showing that the air, like Siew has said, is much clearer. Rivers seem clearer and cleaner. And the air itself, if you think about it, you could just look outside and there, a few weeks ago, there were so few cars. And there's been research showing that in KL itself, since the start of the MCO here in KL, nitrogen dioxide, which is a type of a gas that will cause respiratory problems on the ground level, that has decreased by 60% in KL. And this is research coming up from the Center of Research on Energy and Clean Air. So yeah, lots of that. And then greenhouse gases emissions have greatly reduced. So that's the air, and apparently in New Delhi now the air is clear again, which is quite miraculous.
Right, it's sort of a perverse consequence of this crisis, right? And something that we've always known, that the planet has suffered as a consequence of human activity. But it's not a program. We can't think of using a crisis like this in a positive sense, can we? I mean, unless you think we want to shut down human activity. So tell us, how do we think through this issue?
Yeah, you're definitely right. So I think nobody in their right mind would suggest this as the way forward, right? But what it does is to give everyone a glimpse of what it could be, right? What it could be when human activity or just traffic, if we greatly reduce traffic, what we could get. Cleaner air, much less noise pollution, right? And so it shows that nature is resilient, and this is the word that's being used around by environmentalists a lot in this case, that it is resilient. Nature is resilient, and if we stop adding all our pollutants into it, then it could quickly, I guess, revert back to a much cleaner environment within just a few weeks. But yeah, right. So many of the I guess climate change scientists, for example, or environmental researchers will say they expect that this will not last and then it will come back. But it does give us,
So, Siew, I want to ask you, is there any way we can hold on to these gains? I mean, the clearer air, the cleaner water, the wildlife returning to reclaim spaces. Can we hold on to these gains, given that it's almost inevitable that human life will continue, human activity is set to restart once lockdowns are eased? Can we hold on to these gains?
Well, they are gains, but they're quite momentary. I think the problem is everybody is celebrating otters being seen, in parks, that sort of thing, but they're quite momentary. And the thing is that nobody's looking at why this wasn't just a normal part of life. And I think that's the problem when we celebrate these gains in such a big way. You then don't dig a little bit deeper, which is what is needed, to look at why rivers aren't clean, who are the polluters, what's being done, what hasn't been done, to ensure that rivers are clean, what's not being done to ensure that turtles continue to lay eggs on beaches. Turtles were found on the beaches of PD, Port Dickson recently. What are the issues behind those sorts of things? And I think that is the problem with celebrating these changes as gains.
Right.
Well, let's think about policy then. I mean, what would you like to see, even the low-hanging fruit, policies that might help us hold on to these gains?
Yeah, I think policies are very important. Are they low-hanging fruit? Yes. I think policies that are being put in place and being overseen by local councils are actually low-hanging fruit, because changes to policies can be made very quickly and relatively easily. However, might those be enough? Do we not need to look at federal policies as well, state-level policies and federal policies as well? And this is where I think there's a lot of concern, because what has happened to Pakatan Rakyat's reforms in terms of environmental policy, and I think that is something that a lot of environmental folks are worried about.
All right. We're definitely going to have that conversation about whether a reform in the environmental sectors will continue under the Perikatan National Government. That's coming up later in the show. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. We are joined on the show by the good folks from Macaranga, which is a portal covering the issues of the environment, sustainability in Malaysia. So we were talking a little bit about the positive impact that COVID has had on the environment in the past a couple of months with a slowdown in human activity. But I want to touch on the negative impact. So yes, there's been a pandemic, yes, there's been a lockdown, but there has been significant impact to the environmental sectors. I'm thinking about ecotourism and the sectors that depend on human activity to help the environment. Can you help us think through this issue? Who would like to start? Shall we begin with Yahua?
Sure, yeah. So in Malaysia, and I believe worldwide, many of the conservation NGOs, the environmental NGOs, depend a lot on volunteers. So they don't have a large, financial muscle, and they depend a lot on volunteers, either from overseas or from locals, to do the work. And also, when the volunteering program, they pay some money, right? And that has, of course, all but evaporated, during the MCO. And I've, spoken to my friends in environmental NGOs, and most of them, not all, but most of them are really, I guess, suffering, struggling financially. Some say that they don't have money to pay their NGO staff, and so they would take, so they don't pay themselves. and divert some money to pay their own staff. So financially, they are suffering. And also, many of the, if they're dependent on overseas donors, that has all but dried up. Overseas is just as bad as we are here. And so I think maybe they give less, I guess, priority to overseas ones. So yeah, that has been a hard hit on them financially.
How important is this kind of work that's being done that's now being put on hold, Siew?
It's actually imperative because you know that biodiversity loss is a huge issue in Malaysia as it is globally. And we're not talking about poaching, which is a huge problem. We're looking at, for example, ecosystem services, the effect of not being able to carry on work that will keep forests intact, for example, for services such as the provision of water, whether for drinking or for agriculture. So for example, we know that the paddies have been drying up, and that actually was an issue earlier this year even, you know. So things like research are very important. The sort of activism that's being done to, for example, lobby governments to ensure that there are more areas that are being protected, that rivers are actually being kept clean, the water sources are actually intact, are actually crucial.
Can research be done at this point in time? I'm guessing field research has come to a grinding halt under the MCO. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. Unless I guess they get a permit, but definitely in the early few weeks, right? Like it's all stopped, and it is very bad because research, if they're planned out for like 2 seasons, 3 seasons, some of my friends are saying that now they can only get 1 season from last year, and how could they then like get enough, I guess, sample size to continue the research? So that's huge, a big problem, and they got to figure it out. And then, that's
but
based
can I ask you on balance between NGOs and the state sector, government agencies like Perkhidmatan, are they carrying the bulk of the burden? Are they picking up the slack at this point in time?
I think government agencies have been working very well. Agencies like Perkhidmatan and the Forestry Department in Semenanjung, as well as the forestry, what do you call them, the agencies in Sabah and Sarawak as well, right? It's very much a multi-sectoral thing. It always has been. So carrying on the slack is maybe a bit of a misnomer because it's such a huge task. For example, for poaching, we have in place now a tiger anti-poaching program that has been going really well, and for that to succeed, they have actually brought in armed people with arms, which is the police, the special forces, but you need orang asli communities also to work. You need researchers as well and NGOs to go in and work together with local communities, for example, which a single agency cannot do, and you've got to be patrolling and as well as working together with other agencies, for example, immigration. So it's very hard for one sector to sort of shoulder the burden when others have had to fall back.
I see. Can I touch very quickly on the issue of tourism? We know tourism has been very impacted, hit hard by this pandemic, and I'm just wondering about tourism that has animals part of it, environment, ecotourism. How has this shutdown damaged that part of the ecosystem, especially for, say, animals who depend on this for food, for upkeep and the like?
Sure, yeah. I think for animal rehabilitation centers, which I think is what you're referring to. For example, yes. In Sabah, we have the Sun Bear facility, and they have been extremely dependent on visitors coming in, spending money, not just in donations, but entrance fees, as well as food and food and drinks and all the rest of it. So they have been extremely badly impacted. And this raises the issue really of sustainability, like how sustainable has your funding been, sort of thing. It is really basically halted to a stop as soon as the MCO kicked in. But in terms of other sort of protected areas and national parks, marine parks, that sort of thing, the other concern related to that is that a lot of the reason why governments are persuaded to have protected areas or to gazette natural areas as protected areas is because of tourism. State governments must have a reason to not log, right? And the reason has to be, where else do we get the income from? So if the incomes drop suddenly and the states no longer have incomes, then it becomes a bit of an issue, a question mark there with regards to then how safe are these protected areas, and will governments continue to commit to that?
Very quick question about zoos. I think they've emerged in the news as well. I don't know if you're big fans of zoos, but the idea that they might run out of money and they might have to feed some animals to other animals seem, I think, quite shocking. Why aren't our zoos supported by the state?
Well, I'm not sure if zoos are totally not supported by government, but definitely Zoo Negara has come out and been asking for like donations and the public to help, right? So that does showcase like I guess in a sense how not resilient or how vulnerable or how much dependent they are on ticket sales, right? And I think I don't have a clear answer to your question, but it definitely does trigger us all to think about zoos definitely have a role to play. I'm of the position that zoos have a role to play in conservation and education and research, but if all they can depend on is like ticket sales and also volunteers to do a lot of the work, then they are not resilient, and it poses a danger not just to the conservation but also to the animals, as you just said. And even if they are financially sound, perhaps it begs the question of how much more money did they have before MCO to invest into improving capital expenditures, improving research, improving conservation. I think that's my question. Yeah.
Siew-Lin?
Yeah, if I may add, Zoo Negara is a private zoo, by the way, even though it's Zoo Negara. But anyway, it also begs the question of, so you're saying, why isn't government supporting zoos? And it begs the question, what role do zoos play in the whole conservation policy and the whole conservation approach of Malaysia? Do they not consider them important enough as within the policy? And again, this is where government needs to come in, and it is an opportunity for us to look and to examine at government direction.
All right, and we're going to talk about that, precisely about that, in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to Consider This. Thanks for staying with us on Consider This. Melisa Sharaad here with you tonight. Let's continue our conversation with the co-founders and editors of Macaranga, a portal covering issues of the environment and sustainability in Malaysia. Siew-Lin and Yao Hua. Now, I want to come back to something that you both touched on a little bit earlier in the conversation, particularly you, Siew-Lin. You said that you're concerned about the reforms that were started with the Pakatan Harapan government, whether that's going to be continued with this new government. What were some of the reforms that you really want to see be continued and not be undone?
A lot of the laws related to the environment, wildlife, forestry, fisheries are very, very old and way overdue for an overhaul. What the Pakatan Harapan had done was to actually try and tackle some of these. So, for example, the National Forestry Act is 36 years old. It's from 1984, and accompanying it is a National Forestry Policy, which is dated 1992. So these are way overdue for an overhaul. People have been, I think, environmentalists have been lobbying very hard to get this, what do you call it, tabled, the new bills to be tabled, and they were actually in line to be tabled this year. Likewise, the Wildlife Conservation Act is slightly newer, 2010, but again, because poaching has become such a serious issue, they actually pushed that through very quickly, and in fact was supposed to be tabled in this coming sitting. So it's a real shame that that laws which are badly needed to back up policy, for punishments and all the rest of it, we really need to get these going and push through.
Right. So what accounts for that lag in changing legislation? Is it institutional inertia? Is it a lack of competence or lack of awareness about contemporary issues that need new legislation in order for government to act more effectively? What really is the reason for not moving forward fast enough?
Well, I think political will. I think that's it. Political will.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah,
there are other things as well. Yeah, but Yahua.
Yeah, political will. I imagine. Let's pick up the National Forestry Act, right? I just spoke to an environmental veteran a few days ago, and talking about how has the new government, I guess, or the change in government over the last few years affected it, and he was concerned that the amendments, he's confident, he's hopeful that the amendment will be carried out or tabled this year, but he's worried about it too. But what I'm saying is it's difficult to do. Lots of things to consider. Penalties, financial, who would be affected. And when it comes to forests, it's a very tricky issue, right? Federal-state relationship. So even if the amendments are tabled and passed on the federal level, then it's up to the states, and that will take an even longer time. So I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to go on there. Yeah.
Okay, so not just the pandemic that we have to deal with, but also the expected economic recession, right? So I'm wondering how certain environmental sectors could possibly be impacted by I guess, new economic priorities. It's likely that we will have a shift in the way we're thinking about, or the way the government thinks about the economy. Are you concerned about that, Siew Lin?
I think if the economy does well, then efforts will. I think then they'll be able to pay attention to conservation and environmental sectors. I think that's always been the case in Malaysia, and the environmental sectors have not been a terribly high priority, which is why it's even more important at a time like this, when it appears that attention is focusing back again to an overwhelming, almost narrow focus on the economy, that we continue raising issues like climate change and biodiversity loss, because those problems have not disappeared.
I mean, it's very interesting in some of these discussions. People do believe that you can do one, and then once we have economic prosperity, then we can move on to protect the environment. When we all know, and the argument is very clear, that they're integrally linked. We take the Belum forest issue and clean water. I mean, what would your argument be that, in fact, despite the recession, we need to think about the environment?
Well, you're right? People always say economy has to come first before the environment, right? And I think very often the decision makers or the politicians, I would say, would prioritize economy first, because if they try to conserve or to protect the environment, the effects of that, the gains from that won't be seen as fast and won't be felt as fast, right? And so the votes might not go that way. But water catchment. Actually, if you just look at the drought that's happening, right, in the north, and people have already felt the drastic impact of that, and apparently it's going to get worse. And haze and lots of the environmental, even air. I'm not sure what we call them, the meteorologists and airflow scientists. And they're saying that haze is going to be even worse this year. So if we think along those lines. The argument is very easy to make, actually, that you have to really care for the environment, because now we can feel it. But then...
Wait, so I want to find out from both of you. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to know what you would like the new Environment Minister, Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, to act on. What I mean, if you had his ear, Siew Lin, what would you ask him?
Actually, there are several ministries that are overseeing the environment. So we've got MEWA, and we've also got the Natural Resources Ministry as well. Yeah, and we've got fisheries under the Ministry of Agriculture, if I'm not mistaken. So that covers fisheries as well as marine parks. I think, act quickly. Please look at whatever policies you feel need to be overhauled. Do continue listening to scientists and to expert advisors. That would be really fantastic. And just act quickly, set direction, set very clear direction in favor of the environment and natural resources.
Yao Hua, what about you?
Yeah, for me it's simpler. I care most about the forest at this point. So what are they going to do with the amendments to the National Forestry Act? What are they going to do to, help federal government, right? What are they going to do to help the states protect more of their forest? That would be my question.
All right, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We appreciate your time and your insights, and for highlighting the importance of the environmental sector, especially during these times. Thank you both for being on the show. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for this episode of Consider This. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.